All right, let's get started. I need to say, because it's entirely possible that some of you are new. I'm not paying a terrible amount of attention to who's here, but it seems like some of you are new this week. And even if you aren't, it's important that you know that all of these talks are recorded. It takes us a little bit of time to get them edited and all of that and posted on our website, but then they do get posted on the website. So if you haven't been here, you need to know that this is a systematic approach to marriage to some degree. In other words, it builds, the talks build on each other. So the first week, we talked about the importance of our marriages being God-centered. And I drew that really life-changing picture of you and your spouse, wherever you are, and the importance of you and your spouse moving toward God. And in moving toward God, you'll be drawn closer to each other. Not ultimately because you're focused on each other, but ultimately because you're going after God. But that talk was like 60 minutes, and that wasn't it just now. So you need to go listen to that whole thing because it's really important. Week 2, not only should marriage be God-centered, but it needs to be gospel-reflecting. Like the entire point of Christian marriage is to reflect the gospel. And so if you don't realize that, then you will lose sight of the why of marriage, and it's going to end quite badly for you. So you need to go listen to that talk if you weren't here. Week 3, not only does marriage need to be God-centered and gospel-reflecting, but it needs to be absolutely saturated in forgiveness. If it's not, then what you will end up with is a bunch of unresolved conflict in your marriage that will poison the whole thing. And you'll end up fighting and arguing about things that you have no idea why. You'll end up overreacting, all of these crazy things that are all bad byproducts of unresolved conflict. So that's really, really important. And I want to pick up right from there on this conflict front. And I want to make sure that we're aware of the fact that conflict will either make or break your marriage. It will either make it or break it. Now, what I said there is not conflict will break your marriage. I did not say that. I said conflict will make or break your marriage, depending on how you deal with it. There are levels of intimacy and trust on the other side of a dark season in marriage where there has been more conflict. There's more freedom and liberty and transparency and vulnerability and intimacy and all of the beautiful things of marriage. There's more of that on the other side of conflict so long as conflict is handled properly. So conflict is not a thing to be avoided. Conflict is a thing to be dealt with properly. It will make or break. That's why there's like a category of makeup sex. And the reason for that is because there's actually a sweetness and an intimacy, and makeup sex is not a word in the Bible, to be clear. The world is aware of the idea that on the other side of conflict, there can be sweetness and joy and vulnerability that there was not previously in the conflict. So conflict is a make or break, and it'll break you bad if you don't deal with it properly. So that is really, really important. Another thing on that, not all conflict is sinful, and I don't know that I was as clear on this as I wanted to be, but not all conflict is sinful. Some conflict is just conflict. In that case, you need to be, remember Paul's words back in Ephesians, we need to be kind to one another, and remember this word, tender-hearted. We need to be tender-hearted toward each other. So when you are tender-hearted toward your spouse and they just annoyed you because they said something or did something that was annoying to you, you don't murder them if you're being tender-hearted toward them, because the love you're supposed to be modeling is the tender-hearted kind of love, or the long-suffering kind of love, or the 1 Corinthians 13 love that bears all things. And so the idea there is that when you're tender-hearted towards your spouse, the analogy I gave is my little daughter who tries to trip me while I'm late for work. Like, I don't ever yell at her or get mad. It's annoying, but I have a tender-heartedness toward her that will not allow me to get angry at her. But if the tender-heartedness is lacking, then so much is look at me wrong, and it's on. And there's a bunch of our marriages that in categories where tender-heartedness is lacking, we are lighting each other up because even over things that are not sinful, like that's my whole point, even little conflicts that aren't sinful, and it turns into, World War III, that's bad. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a category of conflict that that is sinful. And when the conflict turns sinful, then what we need to do is confess that sin to God and to one another, and then repent of that sin and have a transaction of forgiveness that goes like this. I was wrong when I said that. What I said was wrong. Please forgive me for whatever it was that you said. I ask for that. I make the request. Melissa in this case would respond to that with "I forgive you," and now that conflict is done and gone, and my marriage will be stronger for it, not the weaker. If you ignore it, right? I'm not going to give last week's talk again, but if you ignore it, if you hope it goes away, if you sweep it under the rug, it won't. And then you've got real issues. Now, where we left last week, and I'm just known for this, as you probably know by now, is these life-changing pictures. And so one of the things, like this was the last picture we drew, last week, and it's what did we do here? Oh yeah, this word. We'll put this one over here. This word is obedience, for those of you who can't read my writing, which sometimes includes me. And this is time over here. And this is trust. And where we have sinful conflict, trust is broken. And where conflict is handled properly, trust is made, restored, rebuilt. Now, trust is an interesting thing because we don't talk about it a bunch. In fact, you don't tend to notice trust until you don't have it for someone. That's when you tend to notice it. So trust is one of the, like the language I use around trust or credibility, if you prefer that language, is like what I call a credibility quotient. It basically goes like this. Everybody sort of operates in whatever sphere they're in with a certain level of credibility. And you can get that in a number of ways, and you can lose it in a number of ways. I have an older brother. He's 8 years older than me, and he's legit. Tier 1, just operator, apex predator, all the things I have for him, but just elite. And so when you're 8 years ahead of me, and I end up showing up at the same school as you, I have a level of credibility because of my older brother. And then I'll either gain more, hold it steady, or lose it. And in his instance, because he's elite and I, so there was some of this that would happen. And so you can have credibility based off of your own accomplishments, the reputation of somebody else. Oh, you're Max's little brother? Like I heard that all through college and some of high school. Oh, you're Max's little brother? And what that meant is like there were shoes, there was a level of credibility that I needed to uphold. We all have it, and then you're either going to gain more, hold, or lose it. That's what's going to happen. And we don't tend to talk much about trust or credibility in the context of marriage until we lose it, until it becomes a problem. And that's really important. So number one, we all walk around with a certain level of credibility. Number two, this is where we're headed, trust or credibility is either built, rebuilt, or broken. It's either built, rebuilt, or broken. That's it. You are always building it, rebuilding it, or losing it. That's the thing about trust. And so that's a thing. And then I've said this, but the third thing on trust is that it is most often noticed once it's gone. Now, you normally don't notice it because you've lost trust. You normally lose the byproduct of trust, which is things like intimacy, vulnerability, transparent communication, and all of a sudden it's like your hair's on fire, and so is your marriage. And you're doing all the things we talked about last week, where you're arguing about things you can't even remember why. You can't remember the last time you had good, clear, transparent, vulnerable communication. Sex is headed in the wrong direction. You don't desire one another. The way you talk about each other is bad. Like all of that. And what all of that actually is most often a demonstration of is the fact that you don't trust each other. You've lost trust due to the erosion in your marriage as it pertains to dealing with conflict. So trust is really, really important. That's the point I'm getting at. And if you don't have it in marriage, you're in really big trouble. And yet, it's not something we talk about very often. Like when you guys were dating, you probably weren't like, I love you so much because I trust you. Now maybe, but probably not. Because trust is kind of like it's like the substrate underneath. It's like the foundation or the unseen. It's like the rebar in the concrete. You don't see it, but it's providing all the strength. And when it's gone, you really notice it. You're like, I parked my car up here, and now it has fallen through the entire, parking structure. Yeah, because that's what trust does. Everything plummets. Everything goes down the tubes when there is no trust. And so, again, trust is either being built, rebuilt, or broken. And so what I want you to see from that is that if trust is either being built, rebuilt, or broken, let's not break it. Okay? Let's not do that. Once we have broken it, here's last week, let's confess, repent, seek forgiveness, and get the thing restored. And then let's be about moving up and to the right. And this is obedience here, time here. So you can put whatever time piece or figure you want in here. Days, months, years. Days, months, years of continued obedience, and trust will be moving up and to the right. Now, if it was that simple, I'd be like, hey, everybody come up here, take a picture of this on your phone and leave. And this picture will change your life. Except for it doesn't quite work like that because, of course, how do we demonstrate obedience over the course of time so that trust is heading between us up and to the right, so that once we have trust, we can experience the vulnerability and the transparency and the intimacy, right? Like, that's actually the thing that makes marriage really good. It's just that we've lost sight of that. That's actually what makes sex really good. We've lost sight of that. This idea of just, what makes sex good is just have a lot of it with whoever you want. That's an awful idea. That is backfiring all over this culture that is so sex saturated, because we've made this idea of good sex being all about technique rather than all about the things that you can't actually bring into the bed with somebody you're just hopping in there with, like real legitimate vulnerability. Real legitimate vulnerability doesn't just happen. It happens over the course of years spent together, having a bunch of conflicts, confession, repentance, hard work, humility, all of that. And then what you end up with after years of that is a marriage that's like, everybody's like, holy crap, that is an awesome marriage. And all of that has to be built on trust. So if you don't have trust, you aren't going to have any of that. So we have to figure out, how do we get this? Not only how do we get it, but how do we grow it? Because if you're not growing it, it's headed the other direction. So that brings us to a couple of ideas that I might have for you as it pertains to trust. I want you, we have it on the screens here, 1 Peter 3. I'm just going to read a couple of biblical texts, and we're going to look at it as this is how we start to build some trust. Here's 1 Peter 3, verse 1. Likewise, wives, be subject. By the way, I don't have time to go into all of this. So, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they don't obey Jesus, they're unbelievers, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. By the conduct of their wives. There's a way in which our actions build trust. There's another way in which our actions break trust. The Apostle Paul is saying, wives, live with your husband in such a way. The idea here is to respect your husband, so that actually by your actions, you can see God step into your husband's life. Watch, verse 2. When your husband, which is the unbeliever here in this context, sees your respectful and pure conduct. So this husband is an unbeliever, and Peter's like, wife, you can live with him in such a way that he can be won over without a word from you because of your respectful and pure conduct. Verse 3, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. Okay, so what he's saying there is he's not saying, ladies, you can't look good. Ladies, you can't braid your hair. What he's saying is don't let it only be external. There's an external beauty, which is great, and there's an internal beauty which is more important than external beauty. Be beautiful in both directions. So that's what's going on there. Verse 4. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. Now watch. For this, verse 5, is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. Verse 6, as Sarah obeyed Abraham. Now here's the thing. We are told in the Bible that Sarah is a beautiful woman. And what we're told about her beauty is there's an external beauty to it. So Peter's not like, hey, don't be beautiful externally. He's not saying that, but he's saying that you better prioritize internal beauty more than you do external beauty. Because external beauty can be manufactured and internal beauty cannot. Okay, so that's that. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, Abraham would be her husband, calling him Lord. Now, Lord there is not Yahweh. Sarah is not calling Abraham God. The idea there would be like sir, or if you want to use Old English, like my lord. Like it's a term of respect. And the interesting thing is that Abraham was not always worthy of respect. We talked about this a couple of sessions ago, that the wife does not respect her husband because her husband is always worthy of that respect. The wife respects her husband because God commands her to. We're making friends. I can feel it. Okay. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Seek to continually be understanding your wife, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Now, we talked about this in the first session. The word weaker there, the idea is not moral weakness or intelligence. It's not any of those kind of things. The idea is, the analogy I've often given here is like men are like anvils. You can hit them with a hammer a bunch of times, and women are like a rose or like a vase. And the point is that God made men and women differently, and a husband needs to interact with his wife like she's his wife, not one of his buddies. See so I think that's apparent. Showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. So what Peter's doing here is he's saying men and women valued before God are eye level with each other. Men, and this is an interesting thing to say in this society, men are not above women. Women are not above men either. They're eye level because they are made in the image of God. They are image bearers. Let us make man and woman, mankind, in our own image. That's what's said in creation. Since they are heirs with you with the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Like that's how serious God takes husbands living with their wives, in loving their wives, is that when you don't, God's like, yeah, remember when you were talking to me? I wasn't listening. Like it's really, really serious. I think that text speaks for itself. We'll jump over to Ephesians 5. I'm going to make my point here in a second. Let me get over to Ephesians 5, verse 33. Paul, we were here last week, so you would be familiar with this. Paul concludes the entire conversation of husbands and wives and how they interact with each other as a reflection of the gospel with this conclusion in verse 33. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So the idea here is that God created, now remember, this is in the context of building, maintaining, or rebuilding trust. The point here is that we can build trust by the way we interact with each other as husbands and wives, or we can break trust by the way we interact with each other as husbands and wives. Okay? And they're mutually exclusive. You're either building it or you're breaking it. And the idea here is that Paul in Ephesians, in Peter, in 1 Peter 3, are reminding us of something that is so central that if you forget it, you're going to be in really a big trouble. Namely, that God made men and women differently. Primarily around the way that men and women, or husbands and wives, are fueled. Men and women are fueled by respect and love. So you'll notice that Paul does not say to the husband that he should respect his wife, though certainly he should show her respect. And it doesn't say that a wife should love her husband, though she certainly should. And there's other Bible verses that let us in on that. But you're kind of getting a little bit of a kind of behind the scenes view here of the fact that the thing that fuels a man more than love is actually respect. I have a diesel and I have a truck that takes 89 octane. And if you put the one in the other, it ends quite badly. It ends really badly, actually. And what's really fascinating about that is that if that's essentially, diesel is respect, if you want to say, and love is 89 octane, and you get those two mixed up, you're like, oh, you know what? 89's cheaper. We'll throw that in the old Power Stroke. That's going to end badly, really badly, right? And so the idea here is that we don't want to just go, you know what? My wife, Melissa, is fueled by love from me to her. Like she's fueled by that. Fuel, meaning it is what causes her to run. If you don't put gas in the truck, you're not going anywhere. You put the wrong gas in the truck, you're really not going anywhere. And so Paul or Peter are not saying it's optional. Hey, if you feel like it, show your husband respect. Like only if you feel like it. That's the thing that drives them and fuels them as they relate, as a husband and wife relate to one another. And so what we have to do is we have to get really, really serious about realizing that God wired husband, your wife, to run off of, be fueled by your love. Your love demonstrated in how you live with her in an understanding way, and how you show honor to her, and how you cherish her. Wife, your husband is wired by God to run off of respect. So what that means is you better not think you're smarter than God. Here's a really good exercise. If you want to build trust, here it is. We'll use the wife as the example here. So I have assigned this homework to counselees a lot of times. And when they do it, it works. And when they don't, it doesn't. So there's that. I've said to the wife on numerous occasions, I used to actually give them a piece of paper, but now I'm like, you can find your own dang paper. But you grab a piece of paper, and at the top of the piece of paper, you write this: I feel loved when you do blank. I feel loved, I, your wife, feel loved when you do blank. And then I say, wife, list a bunch of things there. I don't care how many, list a bunch of things there. I feel loved when you do these things. And then I'm like, husband, read that. So the wife, she's just really feeling it, because this is how wives can be sometimes. I feel really loved when you connect with me emotionally. And the husband's like, I am just going to connect with you emotionally. And I'm like, hey, bro, do you know what that means? And he's like, I have no idea. So that's a problem. Don't go try to do that when you have no idea what it means. Because your wife knows what it means. But you better, and husbands were never ones to read instructions. And that's kind of a problem, because trying to connect emotionally, hey woman, Saturday morning, let's go ice fishing. She's like, I am going to kill you. And then put you in under the ice. And you're like, I was trying to connect with you emotionally. Yeah. Somehow you have developed different ideas of what emotional connecting is, right? So do that exercise. And then if you really want to get freaky, you could do this, and this sometimes will backfire, so you might need counseling when you're done. These are the things that you do. So when you do these things, I feel loved, and when you do these things, I don't. Husband, it's your turn now. I feel respected when you do these things. I feel disrespected when you don't. No husband ever. I feel really respected when you talk to me like I'm 7, Get sarcastic with me, which is your spiritual gift. I just love it. Makes me feel so respected. Just fueled. Just so fueled right now. I can go for decades on that. 400,000 miles on this diesel. Anyway, so that exercise right there, if you are after building trust, then there are ways that you will behave toward each other that will build trust and build such a solid foundation that you will have all sorts of beautiful, God-glorifying intimacy and vulnerability and just transparency and all of that built on that foundation of trust. And if you don't do that, your marriage, if it goes the distance, will not in any way be the kind of marriage that you anticipated going into this thing. So that exercise of love and respect is really, 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 really important. Now, I need to say this along those lines. You better know what each other means. So that's why what you do is you do your homework and then you hand your homework into the other person, and there are no right or wrong answers. You just better understand what she means when she said connects with me emotionally, because you don't know what that means. So you better figure that out. Or when the husband says something like, I feel disrespected when you talk to me the way that you talk to me. Well, he knows what that means, but you don't. So you better figure that out. And when you figure that out, don't turn that into an argument, right? That will backfire badly. Listen, understand, and then implement. Implementation is really big. Because when she tells you that emotional connection for her is at the end of the day when you put the kids to bed and then you sit down and take her hand and ask her about her day, like, what was the best part of your day today? Like, that's all she wants. Literally, that's it. So you have all of the best of intentions in the world, and you guys do the dang homework. She drug you to RedLife, but you'll take the credit for it. So you're here, and you've got this great idea. So you do the homework, and then she says something like that, and then the next night after the homework's been exchanged and understood, like, she puts the kids to bed while you watch ESPN. And then she goes to bed, and you can kind of tell that she's a little irritated. And you're like, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that you went through all of the effort to do the dang homework, and then you didn't do the dang homework. And what you've said to her is, I don't care about you. I don't care. Right? Now, that's not to say that you're going to perform flawlessly on your, I feel loved when you do this and respect me. You're not going to, right? You're not going to perform flawlessly, but I have a solution. Go listen to last week's session and ask for forgiveness when you don't and keep moving forward. And as you move forward, you're going to improve. And as you move forward, you're going to actually see greater levels of intimacy and trust be built. Here's another one. This one's free. You cannot do this once in your marriage and then expect it to be good. You lay down the work on this, you put it down on paper, and then you begin having weekly conversations about how you're doing in your marriage. This is irrefutable right here. Good marriages talk a lot about how they're doing. Bad marriages never talk about how they're doing. Bad marriages, they don't talk, they just slam dishes and passively aggressive and go to bed and watch ESPN and go ice fishing with the boys and then go snowmobiling with the boys and then go out to, for drinks with the girls. And there's this low boil frustration and the kids are like, whoa, what's going on here? And then eventually the kids are like, I don't know, this is just the way that it is. And that's a bad marriage. And in that, there's never any conversation about the condition of the marriage. And good marriages talk often about what the condition of the marriage is. And so the reason you have to keep doing this, and husbands, 1 Peter 3, live with your wife. Keep on living with your wife in an understanding way, which means when she says connect with me emotionally, you better understand what that means, and then you better realize that that's going to change over time. My wife will probably listen to this talk. She's currently up serving with all of them little kids. So she'll listen to this one. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, and I am right about this, for the record. We'll see how this goes. I'm taking a drink, not because I'm thirsty, but because I'm wondering how this is going to end. I am right about this. We talked about it the other day, and then the day before that, and then one more time before that. When we were first married, and Melissa already knows where this is going. When we were first married, my wife was like, we did something like this. It was something along the lines of like, what can I do better? That was my idea. Like, I didn't know about love and respect. I was like, what can I do better? She's like, you can touch me more often. Which sounds great, except for I'm not the most touchy person ever. It's like, meh, like you want to hop in the sheets, we can do that, but like this other stuff, I don't know, I'm just not so sure. But it was And like that's the straight goods on that. You can email me if you want to, but that is the way that was. So just to be clear. And there's a problem with that. The problem with that is obviously she's feeling objectified because the only time I'll touch her is when I want to hop in the sheets, and I'm not connecting with her physically any other time. So I'm not like, I didn't let that one go. I meant to say that. I'm going to talk more about it in 2 sessions. That's actually a really big deal, a really big deal. But I'm an idiot at 20, whatever I was. And so I was like, yeah, I had no idea. And so then I'm like, you know what? That's really dumb of me. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to smack your butt. I'm going to give you a hug. I'm going to do all these things because that's what she wanted. We now have 4 children, which tells you that we figured some of those things out. But it also indicates that now she's like, I just don't want you to touch me right now. Emma has been under, my left foot all day. Owen everywhere, Judah, Haven is sobbing, for some reason we don't even know. It's like, so she's like, I just need a second. So the point is that in the ongoing conversation, because we've been married a while, in the ongoing conversation, the target has moved. Not because my wife doesn't have the right to move it, not because she's crazy, not because she doesn't still want me to touch her, but sometimes she doesn't want me to touch her. So it was like when we were younger, I demonstrate love by touching her. Now I demonstrate love by not, just giving her some space. So now what she wants is like, tell me that I can go get groceries by myself. I'm like, woman, I love you. Go get groceries by yourself. So now that's what she does. And the point is I would be an absolute moron, and so would you, husband, to be like, well, 15 years ago you wanted me to touch you. What changed? A lot. A lot. So stop being an idiot and realize that your wife is going to change over time. Husband, you are too. So that's why you can't like one and done this thing. 15 years ago, I said I loved you. 15 years ago, this is what worked. And now, no. Peter's whole point is you have to continue studying your wife in an understanding way, because if you don't, God shuts off the faucet and hangs up the phone. That's what God does to a husband who acts like that. And that's like really serious. Like I think we're a little lighthearted in here, which is totally fine. Like I'm totally great with that. But husband, you better tremble at the reality that when you live with your wife in a not understanding way and don't honor her and don't love her and don't cherish her, God looks down and he's like, that's my daughter and we're not good. Like God help the kid who marries my daughter and then treats her poorly. And like I'm a sinner and I still would want to kill that kid. And so God is holy and he takes very seriously the treatment of his daughters. And that's why these need to be ongoing conversations, which brings us to not only the way that our actions bring and create and build trust, but the way that our words build trust. That's Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29. It reads like this: let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. Now, in the context of marriage, or just when you read that, you're like, oh, corrupting talk, I probably shouldn't say the F word. You're right, you shouldn't say the F word. But that's actually not the only way that can be interpreted. There's all kinds of ways that husbands and wives talk to each other in ways that are corrupting. Like think about like it causes, it's like rust. Like I hate rust on my trucks. I hate it. And so I just buy them and sell them all the time before they can rust out. That's kind of my plan, which is a little bit of an inside joke because I change trucks all the time. But it's like I hate rust. And so I'm going to sell it before it rusts. I'm going to buy another one. I'll sell it before it rusts because I hate rust. And the idea there of corrupting is similar to that idea. Let no kind of that corrupting sort of talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Now here's the thing. Everybody wants to come in my office. I mean, not everybody, but you understand what I'm saying. Everybody. Everybody wants to come in my office and talk to me about the fact that their marriage is bad because they have communication problems. Communication problems are fruit issues, not root issues, just to be clear. The reason you guys communicate so bad is not the primary problem. It's an outworking of the problem. Do you understand what I'm saying there? But the way that we talk to each other is absolutely integral to building and maintaining trust. One of the highlights of my counseling career went something like this. I used to do this. I don't anymore because it gets so awkward, and I have a pretty decent poker face, and I lost it on this one. So I had a husband and a wife come in. They'd been counseling for a while. They were not doing anything that I was asking them to do because obviously they were smarter than me. And so the whole point here is Alex, you're an idiot. Our marriage is bad. We'll come talk to you, but then we'll kind of help you be a better counselor. So this was obviously going very well. I eventually, a few sessions in, was like, man, something's just off here. So I handed them both a Post-it note, and I said, 1 to 10, condition of your marriage. Write it down. And then give it back to me. And then before you give it back to me, draw a line across the Post-it note and give me one word for why you rate it where you rate it. His was a 4, and he didn't have a reason why. I had him at a 4 too, so I was like, great. Hers was a 9. Her reason, communication. Now, do you see what's wrong with that? I hope so. 1 is a 9, which is really high. And 1 is a 4, which is bad, which is where it actually was. And the reason she had it as a 9 is because of how well they communicate. So communication is actually not your primary problem, but it is a problem because you're obviously not talking about the fact that your marriage is bad. Now, you're in counseling, which is ironic, so don't run that 9 stuff at me. I'll just give you a free tip. If I ever do that with you, don't run a 9 if you're in my office for counseling, because it makes it very difficult for me to improve upon the dumpster fire that you currently have in front of you. So that's just free. But so it's like, I don't know how to improve on a 9, and that's because it wasn't a 9. And obviously, if you're a 9 and a 4, and you're a 9, so good because of how great your communication is, but he's a 4, and then you don't know, and that was our last counseling session, because when I let that cat out of the bag, it ended badly. But I understand why. But the issue there is that communication was not the primary driver on that. Communication was a fruit, but it's not a root issue. But it is nonetheless very, very important. And so you are not going to fix all of the problems of your marriage by talking nicer to each other. You need to back up a week in Red Life and go back to owning your sin, confessing it and repenting of it. But then moving forward, you had better start talking about your marriage a bunch, and you better start doing it in a God-honoring way. And honestly, that is what can be so difficult to turn a bad marriage good, is learning how to begin to communicate with the person you're supposed to be in love with, not at war with, right? You guys have been at each other's throats for 2 decades, and now we got to flip a switch. The switch flips in the heart, and then it comes out of the mouth. That's important that we understand that. So having said that, there's a couple of ways to talk very corruptingly to one another. These are both very obvious. One is the content of your talk to each other, like what you actually say to each other. And here's another just huge one, how you say it. I cannot tell you how important it is for you to think about how you say stuff. Especially, and look, I'm not singling anybody out here. I'm on your side. But I don't think wives understand how important their tone is with their husband. I realize, I joke around, I have the spiritual gift of sarcasm. So I realize how enjoyable it can be to get sarcastic with somebody. It feels good, but it does not produce any kind of change in them at all. And there's some wives, and I listen to them in the way that they talk to their husbands, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I know you're frustrated with him, but the way you talk to him, and I'm not a health, wealth, prosperity manifest guy, but the way that you talk to him will be indicative of the direction he's headed. If you talk to him like he's an idiot of a 7-year-old, he's going to always be trending in that direction, because there's not a husband in the world who runs off of, muddy Mountain Dew sludge water. He's a diesel. He needs fuel in him, pumped into him, called respect, not demeaning, belittling sarcasm. And so there's a bunch of wives who are like, yeah, but he doesn't listen and he doesn't get it. So when I talk down to him, then he pays attention. He's paying attention because that's probably how his dad talked to him. And so what you're conjuring up in him is not good. You want your husband to be a man, and you talk to him like he's a child. And it's your tone. I don't have a problem with what you said. It's your tone. We're having a great time, I can tell. And I feel like this is a perfect time to take a break. I feel a need to take a break, so do you. So let's do that, and then we'll come back in here and talk through some rules of communication. If you would like to come and talk to me, I'd be delighted to chat with you. All right. So what I want to do here is, so we're talking about corrupting talk, and we've established content's important, their tone's important. Their tone is something that very few people think about when they converse with one another. It's really important. And then you have, good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. So there's the kind of talk, there's the kind of conversation that builds up, that is fitting to the occasion, and gives grace to those who hear. Marriages that are building trust are going to be marriages marked by that kind of communication. So I've got, how many of these? These are called Alex's Rules of Trust Building Communication. I've got 6 of them. Here we go. Number 1, do what you say. Like if you care about building and rebuilding, and I'm just all after some husbands right now. Do what you say. If you said you're going to get milk after work, get it. If you said you're going to pick up your socks off the floor, Melissa right now, she's like, yes. Pick up those socks. Do it. If you said you're going to put the kids to bed, put them to bed. If you said you guys are going out for dinner, don't give me this I'm tired stuff or I'm busy stuff. Take her out to dinner. Do what you say. Some husbands are like professional check bouncers. You write checks that you never cash, and eventually your wife and your children, that's a whole nother talk for another day, your children are like, I don't even believe you, Dad. You don't want to be that. I feel a ton of conviction about this with my children especially, because my daughter, who's just really sweet, will just call me on it. And she doesn't have a lot of tact. She's like, Daddy, you said we would do this. And you said it 3 times and we haven't done it. And I'm like, ugh, because that's not like it's not that big of a deal. She's 7. It's a super, super, super big deal. If you want to build trust, and you're either building it or breaking it, if you want to build trust through your communication, be building up, giving grace to those who hear, do what you say. Number 2, say what you mean. Say what you mean. Most of the ladies in this room are probably more intelligent than their husbands. That's probably true. I don't know, we could take the test, but I know I've seen more often where a wife, and it's certainly not to say that a husband can't do this, but normally I see credibility problems with the husbands on following through with the things they say they're going to do. That doesn't mean a wife can't do that. And then more often I see a wife sort of being passive-aggressive or sarcastic, like she says the right thing but her tone is off with her husband, and so she's saying this thing, but she's meaning something else. And certainly, to be clear, a husband can do the same thing. I'm just saying, if you were to put those into categories, number 1 tends to be more of a husband problem. It can certainly be a wife problem. And number 2, say what you mean can tend to be more of a wife. But that is, nothing will kill trust faster than the 2 of you are talking to each other and both of you are like, he did, he said this, but he meant that. She said this, but she meant that. And look, I just want to help you here. I want to be really helpful. Here's a novel idea. If you don't understand what your wife just said and it sounded a little passive-aggressive or it sounded a little sarcastic, why don't you just do this? Hey, babe, when you said that, it sounded to me like you were actually saying this, and I could be wrong on that. Did you mean this or did you mean that? And then you look at her, and she's like, I meant this. And you're like, oh, great, I misunderstood you. Or she's like, you know what? Yeah, it's been a long day, whatever. I was getting a little sorry. Please forgive me for that. And you're fine. But there can be and I've watched this happen. I've watched it in my office. I've watched it all over the place. Where you two are it's shots fired all day long here. We're saying stuff. We're meaning other things. And nobody's even talking about addressing it at all. Number 1, do what you say. Number 2, say what you mean. Number 3, fire your internal defense attorney. He's too expensive. Fire him. Here's how this usually goes. Melissa, it's your husband, Alex. I was curious, how is it that you feel that we are doing presently in our marriage? well, Alex, I think we're doing pretty well in these areas, but I think you've been dropping the ball in this one. And like I'm watching her face and I can tell what's about to happen. So I've already, like I called him. I called him. Because I keep him on retainer, obviously. So I have my attorney on retainer. And so she has the audacity to not give me just all gold stars. So I can see it's shifting. I'm decently okay at reading the room here. Been married to her for a while. So here it comes. I've already got him on the phone. I'm like, let's do this. We're going to, so she's bringing it, and I'm like, I've got alphabetical, chronological, theological. I mean, I've got it all. And then I'm going to alliterate it at the end. So she's not even done bringing her critique, and I've already got 9 reasons why she's wrong. And then I bring him out, and we're at Spiro's, and it's just awesome. Like, as you can imagine, obviously, the night ends so well. Fire your defense attorney. Your job is not to be right. Your job is to foster trust and be godly. If the gospel is true, and it is, then you are a way worse sinner than your wife knows you to be. You are a way worse sinner than you know you to be. You are not a way worse sinner than God knows you to be, and he loves you and died for you anyway. Fire your defense attorney. Way too expensive. Way too expensive. Number 4, fire your accountant. I don't like him either. Your attorney can get the alphabetical, chronological, theological. Your accountant, because this is how this happens. So Melissa, she's about to bring it. So I've got the attorney on the one line. I've got the accountant on the other. What he's doing is he's digging back into the past. He's got the receipts of all of the things that she has ever done, so that way I can launch my counterattack. I've got my 9 reasons why she's wrong, but that's only me defending myself. Obviously, healthy marriages are marked not only by ridiculous defense, but you have to have a good offense. A good offense is even better than a great defense. Some of you are like, I wonder if he's joking. Yes, but anyway. So now you get the accountant out, and he rolls up. He's got the filing cabinet. Again, you're at Spiro's. You're like, I'm sorry, but can you bring the filing cabinet? Great. So then you start pulling them out, and you're like, okay, now you haven't asked me what you can do differently, but would you like, again, chronologically, alphabetically, how would you like to do this? And so you just bring that on. And then obviously the night even ends better than it originally would have. Your attorney and your accountant are too expensive, and they are eroding all of the trust in your marriage. And what you're demonstrating is that you actually functionally in that moment do not actually believe the gospel. I'm not saying you're not a Christian. I'm saying in that moment functionally, if you have to defend yourself and then you have to launch a counterattack of all of her past sins, you are not walking out the Christian gospel at all. And your marriage cannot afford to continue doing that. Attorney, gotta go. Accountant, also gotta go. Number 5, talk about things that matter and things that don't. That's communication in marriage. It's talking about things that matter and things that don't. There's a bunch of marriages who have almost completely stopped talking and cannot remember the last time they talked about something that mattered. And there's a bunch of marriages who cannot really remember the last time they talked about something that didn't. Now, I'm telling you to talk about both. And the reason I'm telling you to talk about both is because every healthy relationship ever was able to talk about both. Things that really mattered and things that don't. A healthy marriage, once the forgiveness transaction has happened and you're working toward trust, a healthy marriage is going to talk about things like the condition of the marriage. A healthy marriage is going to talk about things like sex and how your sex life is and how that's going and how it can be improved. A healthy marriage is going to talk about things like disciplining children and all of those things. And obviously you can understand how the devil gets such a foothold in destruction, begins to wreak havoc in marriages, because once trust is eroded and not forgiven, then we lose the ability to communicate. And then the result of that is that we just turn this thing into an absolute train wreck. You've got to learn how to talk about things that matter, but you also have to be able to talk about things that don't. When you two were dating, and again, some of this is just disposition. Some of my friends and Melissa's friends, they just talk. And I mean, I get an absolute, it's one of the biggest sources of joy for me in pastoral ministry. It's that big for me. Because I hear about some of our friends in the way that they just love to talk to each other. So they just like talk. They're like, you know what, let's go for a walk and talk. And so they go out and like they go to bed at 11 p.m. They started walking and talking at 7, brought it back to the house, kept talking. I'm like, I don't know how you talk that long about anything. But they love it. And my wife and I talk about it routinely. Like we don't talk, so we talk about how much other people talk. So that's how we talk. But it's like they just talk so much about everything. And it's like, that's awesome. Melissa and I tend to be, we don't like to talk as much. I'll probably talk more than her. Yeah. But so for us, it's like it's work to go talk. So we have to, it's work to talk. Like we're fine talking about things that matter, but we struggle to talk about things that don't. And my wife is like so incredibly gracious to me. I'll be like, babe, because I ask her for permission because I just want her to know like what she's getting. I'll be like, babe, can we talk about trucks for a second? And like I can tell because I can read her, like she does not want to talk about trucks, but you know what she'll do? She'll like put down, her book and she'll come sit next to me and she's like, yeah, let's talk about trucks. Can we talk about sleds? Sure, we can talk about snowmobiles. Can we elk hunt? Sure. And like, does she, like, to be clear, my wife doesn't care about any of that, but she loves me. Like she cares about me, so she'll talk about it. And I'm totally fine with the fact that I know that she doesn't want to talk about it, and she will anyway. Like, that's awesome. What a gift. When you're dating, nobody had to if I knew you when you were dating, I'm not like on the bench seat of the Chevy with you, like, hey guys, talk about some stuff that doesn't matter, because that's all you did. Hey guys, talk about some stuff that mattered. You did that too. That's how relationships start. And then what happens, and there's a bunch of reasons for this, but what ends up happening is you stop pursuing one another, which is to say you stop talking about things that matter and things that don't, and then over the course of time, you're 3 degrees off over a few decades, and pretty soon, you're passing in the night. You're roommates. And if I could take you back to the day that you stood before God, your family, and some pastor with a Bible somewhere, you did not sign up for roommates. That was not the goal. And nobody wants to end up being roommates, but few people are willing to do the things to keep them from being that. One of those things is good communication, like rule number 5, talk about things that matter and things that don't. Number 6, this is probably the biggest one on the list for me. These are all just things from my counseling experience, but number 6, I'm pulling it right out of here. Celebrate grace, give grace, celebrate grace. So here's what happens in the counseling room all the time. It's bad. And the husband is bad for these reasons, and the wife is doing poorly for these reasons, and I'm going to try to help, and whatever. So we're going to get after. We're going to dig right down into the roots of the whole thing, get down to the basement, figure it out. We're going to talk about all this stuff. And then eventually what's going to happen is they're going to come back into my office, and the exchange will go something like this. So how was you guys this week? And they're like, good. And then they know, because they've been here a few times, they know that I don't actually care about how the week was. I just care about why it was whatever it was. So they say good, I say why. And we awkwardly stare at each other for a while. And then the wife says, he put the kids to bed last night, which is really significant because he was not ever putting the kids to bed, and he thought that his job was to go to work and then come home and sit on the couch. So I got all up in his grill about the fact that work begins when he gets home. His 9 to 5 is not that difficult, even if it is. His real job is get home and love his wife and serve his children. And I'm like, and one of the ways you can do that is put your kids to bed. So this is monumental for us. This is huge, that he turned off the dang TV, was present in his home, and put a kid to bed. And it meant enough to his wife to say, it was a good week. It was a good week. So the next thing I say, what did he say when you told him that? What did he say when you thanked him for that? And she almost always says, I didn't. And then I look at him and I go, did she? And he goes, no. You could easily flip those. Good week. Why? Well, because when I got home yesterday, my wife acknowledged me when I walked in the door, came up, gave me a hug, thanked me for working, and said dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, which was huge. Because what had begun to happen is the kids were all over the place and they're crazy and she's busy and all of that. And he gets in the door and she doesn't even really acknowledge him. Not because she doesn't love him or isn't thankful for him, but just because it's busy and there's kids everywhere and there's dinner everywhere and there's everything else everywhere. And she took 40 seconds to step away from the stove, which is like really beautiful, God-glorifying work, to look her husband in the eyeballs and go, I love you. I'm glad you're home. Looking forward to talking about your day. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. And that little thing right there was huge, huge. And I say, what did she say when you thanked her? And he says, I didn't. And I look at her and I say, did he? She says, no. What's wrong there? What's wrong there is far more profound than it might appear. Some of you are like, well, yeah, I just failed to acknowledge it. Precisely. That is precisely the problem. Because what we have here is we have a marriage that's hanging by a thread, and that friends have turned into enemies and are now trying to figure out how to be friends again. And we've had the transparency of a wife to say, like, I know this sounds so dumb, but it is like such a big deal to me. Like, it would be so huge for me if he would just put the kids to bed. And the husband is like, I'm going to do that because I love my wife and want to honor God. And so God is like manifestly stepping into this marriage and flexing his muscles a bit. And we have so grown accustomed to missing his presence and his grace that rather than seeing this as an opportunity of God drawing us to himself in greater levels of obedience, in bringing greater levels of trust in our marriage, we're just like, meh. And the point is it's not just an offense to the husband or the wife, it's actually offensive to God. So the point is that good marriages that are using communication to build trust are marriages that have learned how to celebrate grace. Celebrate evidences of God's grace in your life. I'm not talking about being a cheerleader, to be clear. No offense to cheerleaders, but I'm not talking about that. Our high school football team was awful. Hadn't won a game in like my life. We were always getting blown out by 60 at halftime, and the poor cheerleaders, like I just always felt so awful for them because they got to come out and they're like, whatever cheerleaders do. It's like, you guys can literally go home, and like the team can too. I think the score would be about the same. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about flattery. We're not talking about some kind of manufactured, oh, honey, you're so awesome when he's not. We're talking about a primarily vertical worship of God, praising God for evidences of his grace in the life of our spouse. We're Christians after all. This one's a big one. I think you might be able to tell. This one is a really big one because if you are on the lookout for the grace of God in the life of your husband or your wife, guess what? You're going to find it. And if you're not, guess what? You won't. So the following week happens. Same couple, different day. As in a week later, to be clear. Come in. How's it going? Good. Why? Well, I got home. She stepped away from the stove, hugged me, gave me a smooch, told me dinner's ready, said she can't wait to hear about my day. What'd she do when you told her that you were thankful for that? Cried. Okay, good. Like that happens. She cried. Put them kids to bed, husband, no tasers, no zip ties, no threatenings of monsters under the bed if you get out of bed, just straight goods, we're memorizing Bible verses, we're singing some songs, we're praying to Jesus, nobody is bleeding, kids are in bed, husband walks out, just killing it. Wife walks up to him, honey, you are the sexiest thing I've seen all day. That husband, he's 5'10" usually, he's now 6'3". He can normally bench 110 because he's an accountant, but now he's like 240, just reps, right? Drives a Toyota usually, switched over, just turns into a diesel truck out front, just the baddest man ever. Why? Because the husband and the wife have failed to realize that the way that they speak to each other is like monumentally important. You can speak and bring about a certain kind of life and change. I'm not talking mysticism here, but that sort of celebrating of grace in each other's life, like, hey, babe, the way you just handled that situation with Junior there, like, 3 weeks ago, you might have strangled him, and that time you, like, disciplined him really good, and that was awesome. Like, praise God for that. That's so huge, so huge. And good marriages are marked by the ability to celebrate grace. Bad marriages aren't. Okay, nearly done. Galatians chapter 6. This is really important. Like, I know I say that a lot. That's because all of this is really important. Galatians chapter 6 is really important. I'm going to completely switch gears because I want to put all of this in context. We're like 4 weeks in. I want to put all of this in context. 4 weeks in, some of you are like, this has been a catastrophic waste of time. I'm sorry that you feel that way. I would love to try to know why that is, or maybe see if I could say something better or different next time, try to help you in any way that I can. Others of you are like, meh, like it's okay. And then others of you are like, we were about to die, and now it's like, God, just everything's changed. And like, praise God for all of that. Even those of you who haven't got the value out of it, like, I wish you were, but in the end, this is what it is. But this is the part, this is really, really important. Now, let me read this quickly and tell you what we're not talking about, and then quickly frame up for you what we are talking about as a way to sort of, we got a couple sessions left, but the plane is beginning to get ready to land, and as you may be aware, anybody can fly a plane at 35,000. It's getting it from 35 to the tarmac. That's where it gets dicey. So we got to make sure that we understand what we're doing and what we're not doing here. Context, here we go. Do not be deceived. This is Galatians 6. This is the Apostle Paul talking to the church at Galatia. Pretty familiar passage. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever one sows, that will he also reap. The one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. The one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we don't give up. Now, this is not a marriage text, but this can be applied to marriage. And what you have going on here is the Apostle Paul simply pointing to something that everyone in this day was profoundly aware of. It's an agricultural society. So he's pulling on a physical reality that they would have seen all around them and then making a spiritual application. Paul will do this on occasion. It's genius. And so the idea that you have going on underneath this that may not be as profound to us, because I don't know how many of us are farmers or like gardeners or whatever, but you have three realities in the physical realm of things that then also correlate to the spiritual side of things. And I want you to see that, and then let's make some application to marriage. First thing to be aware of in the physical, that's also true in the spiritual, is that you always reap exactly what you sow. So Paul, if you sow to the flesh, verse 8, then you'll reap from the flesh. So if you plant fleshly, sinful seeds, then there will be a fleshly, sinful harvest. If you plant corn, you get corn, apples, sin. You always reap exactly what you sow. Any questions? Good. Number 2, you always reap more than you sow. Like corn is not kernel of corn. Acorn is not acorn back. Like, hey, honey, it's a great year. We got an acorn. Like, we better get a dang oak tree. That's kind of the goal here. Corn row. Anyway, so you're tracking with that, right? So you always reap exactly what you sow. You always reap more than you sow. You know that, like, you know this because you know that sin, when you let sin go in your life, go unchecked in your life, it's not like, hey, I'll keep myself under control, I'll be fine. It's like, hey, why don't you just leave me alone for a while and I'll blow the whole thing up. You always reap exactly what you sow. You always reap more than you sow. Third, you always reap later than you sow. Corn today is not corn tonight. Acorn today is not oak tree tonight. Now that's really important because I want to apply this to your marriage, and I want you to know that some of you have been sowing to the flesh for a while in your marriage. You know what that means? It means you're going to reap exactly that and have. You know what else that means? It means you're going to reap more of that than you really wanted to. You know what else it means? It means you're going to reap later. You're going to reap later. Some of you are like, well, I should just quit. Don't quit yet. Because Because when by the grace of God you decide to stop in your marriage sowing to the flesh and begin sowing to the Spirit, you know what's going to happen? You're going to reap from the Spirit. You know what else is going to happen? You're going to reap more. You know what else is going to happen? You're going to reap later. You know why that's important? So don't grow weary of doing good. Good. Sowing to the Spirit. Why? Because in due season we'll reap if we don't give up, if we don't faint. If you're going to be a farmer, you got to have some patience. Because you plant the dang corn and it was expensive and all of your money is wrapped up in it and you got to wait months until there's a harvest. Marriage is like that. And so some of you right now, your marriages, the gardens of your marriage are like full of weeds, full of the flesh. And you're trying to switch it over. And that's tough to do, really tough to do. But the point is so you go out in the dang garden with your wife, with your husband, by way of confession and repentance, seeking God, reflecting the gospel. You're out there pulling weeds. You're just pulling weeds. And then you start sowing seeds of righteousness, seeds of gospel seeds. And then you stand there, you're like, I thought they'd be here by now. No, you threw the seed down 20 seconds ago. Give it a second. And then eventually, over the course of time, there starts to become fruit of righteousness. But then you're like, son of a gun, where'd these weeds come from? Well, of course there's weeds there. You're a sinner. And you're going to reap later, and that's going to happen. But what you do is that over the course of time, in persevering in godliness and doing good, you end up walking out into your garden someday, which is your marriage, and you're like, it is wonderful out here. There is life out here. There's beautiful smells and beautiful colors from these flowers out here. Our kids are flourishing out here. God is being glorified out here. And everybody wants that. The question is, how many weeds can you pull and are you willing to pull before you get there? Because it's going to be a bunch. It's going to be a bunch. And what I want you to do is I want you to walk out of here tonight, 4 sessions in. And if you haven't listened to the first 3, go listen to them. I want you walking out of here 4 sessions in going, man, honey, it's going to take some work and we're going to pull some dang weeds, but we can see a beautiful harvest of righteousness if we don't give up. So let's start pulling weeds. Let's start planting seeds of righteousness. Let's persevere in that, and let's see God do marvelous things in our marriage. Okay, love you. See ya.